What's your story?
What does accessibility mean to you?
How can technology contribute to greater inclusivity?
accessiBe Spotlight Sessions.
In collaboration with Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind's digital series, Where Are We Now?
Featuring David Capozzi, the former executive director at the U.S. Access Board. Hello and welcome to the Where Are We Now and Spotlight Session Collaboration Podcast. Together with the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind and accessiBe, we're here to side by side to foster a better understanding and empathy between the blind and business communities. We'll be highlighting the challenges, triumphs, and daily realities faced by people who are blind or visually impaired and those with disabilities. And we will be exploring the latest trends, technologies, and policies that are shaping a more inclusive digital world and accessible future for all. My name is Josh Basil. I'm your co-host for today's show. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders, and a power wheelchair user. I'm the community relations manager here at accessiBe and a passionate disability rights advocate and trial attorney focused on breaking down barriers to access and inclusion for people with disabilities.
I'm Jocelyn Hunter, your other co-host for today's show. I am Senior Director of Communications at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. CLB is a nonprofit serving the Washington, D.C. region through programs and services for people of all ages who are blind or visually impaired.
Today, we'll be talking with David Capozzi, the former executive director of the U.S. Access Board, which is a federal agency dedicated to advancing full access and inclusion for all. He managed $9 million in program expenditures and 29 professional and support staff who developed accessibility guidelines for the Americans with Disabilities Act, Architectural Barriers Act, Telecommunications Act, and accessibility standards for electronic and information technology under Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. Over his 22 years at the U.S. Access Board, he oversaw the rulemaking process for the original and revised Section 508 standards. David, you're awesome. Just want to throw that out there. But, thank you so much for joining us today, David, and welcome to the Where Are We Now and Spotlight Sessions Collaboration Podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and I'm really honored to be your second guest and to follow John Kemp, who I worked with when we were both at Easterseals before passage of the ADA 34 years ago. So thank you.
Absolutely. And John's such an amazing human being and advocate as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Got a good list here.
David, welcome. Very happy to have you joining us on this episode. Thank you for your time. You've had quite an illustrious career, especially there at U.S. Access Board. Can you share with us about your career there at U.S. Access Board, and additionally, some of your most memorable achievements there?
Well, thank you. So first, let me go back a couple years before that. 38 years ago, I started my career with the Paralyzed Veterans of America, working on transportation issues, including the Air Carrier Access Act and its regulations. I then went to the National Easterseals Society, where I worked with John, where I worked with a team of lawyers also from organizations, and along with congressional staff, we helped draft many of the transit provisions in the ADA. Afterwards, I had the honor of chairing the Department of Transportation's advisory committee that helped develop their first ADA regulations. After that, I had the opportunity to work for the Access Board. And in my 2 decades plus at the Access Board, we helped to make our country more accessible through our Architectural Barriers Act compliance and enforcement work. We did some important research, including on indoor environmental quality, play surfaces, and anthropometry of wheeled mobility users. We also organized 14 different advisory committees involving over 300 different organizations on a variety of topics to help develop groundbreaking accessibility guidelines and standards, some addressing issues for the first time in the world, such as playground accessibility, access to the great outdoors, and access to information and communication technology.
And David, with everything, I love that you kind of went back in time. From a wheelchair using standpoint, When did your journey start with your spinal cord injury?
Yeah, so I was injured in a car accident in January 1977. For those older people that are watching, it was during the blizzard of 77, and I was from Buffalo, New York, and was going to college down in Tennessee. And it was after my first semester, so I had gone home for Christmas and was driving down to Tennessee for my second semester. Made it as far as Bowling Green, Kentucky, when I went off the side of the road in a snowstorm. And luckily for me, a medic from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, happened to be a couple cars behind me, saw that I went off the road down an embankment, flipped over my car, blew it up, caught it on fire. I had shotgun shells in the back. They were going off because we were going to go duck hunting, so they were exploding.
Wow.
He pulled me out of the car, pulled me up an embankment, and saved my life. I would have been dead otherwise. His name was Lee Elias, and we named our second son Michael. His middle name is Elias after Lee.
Mm.
And we stayed in touch until he passed away a few years ago. And he was then godfather to our child also.
Thank you for sharing that story and the journey of that with us. Thank you.
Sure.
And accessibility and equal access are essential, and together we do have an opportunity to kind of educate communities about it. To that end, can you please give us through Section 508, how does it make the world really more accessible, and especially in the U.S.?
Sure. But before I answer that, let me remind everybody that Section 508 is actually 38 years old. It was originally added to the Rehabilitation Act in 1986. It then required the Secretary of Education and the Administrator of the General Services Administration to develop voluntary guidelines for federal agencies for electronic and information technology accessibility. But there was no enforcement mechanism. So as a result, the law and the guidelines were really largely ignored. Enter an advocate. In 1997, the Department of Education was about to make a large database software purchase, but it was inaccessible to employees with visual disabilities. So Judy Heumann, who was then the Assistant Secretary of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, and her assistant, Howard Moses, both of those individuals have since passed away, they learned that the 1986 version of Section 508 had no teeth and advocated to strengthen it. So the next year, 1998, Congress passed the Workforce Investment Act, and that law included an update to the old Section 508. It now requires that federal agencies provide individuals with disabilities equal access to electronic and information technology and data comparable to those who don't have a disability, unless an undue burden would be imposed on the agency. It required the Access Board, the agency that I used to work for, to develop standards, which are the technical requirements and criteria that are used to measure conformance with the law. It also required the Access Board and GSA, General Services Administration, to provide technical assistance, and it required a biannual report from the Department of Justice regarding the state of federal compliance with the law, including actions regarding individual complaints, and finally had enforcement provisions. The improvements to Section 508 came about because Judy and others recognized that more needed to be done. Although Section 508 only applies to the federal government, its impact really has been felt in state governments, the private sector, and around the world. We were the first country to use public procurement of information and communication technology and civil rights laws to promote the acquisition of accessible technology. The European Union now has a new set of technology accessibility standards modeled after our updated Section 508 standards. Australia is using public procurement to drive accessible technology. And Canada has a relatively new law that addresses public procurement of technology as well. So the world is paying attention to what we do here.
You are a wealth of knowledge, David, and have been at this for so long. And thank you for all that you've done, all that you continue to do. But no, thank you. And I'll throw it over to Jocelyn.
Josh, I echo that comment. Yes, David, you are truly a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing that informative timeline about the evolution of Section 508, the pioneers, our late advocates, in recognizing that it needed to be sharpened, it needed to be addressed. Thank you so much. And we want to dive a little bit deeper into Section 508 and the role that it plays currently in this digital world and how it can really help protect those who are living with low vision.
Okay. Um, First, federal websites and intranet sites are required to meet the Section 508 standards, so that's important. The standards also specify now that all types of public-facing content, as well as 9 categories of non-public-facing content, like emails that communicate agency official business, have to be accessible. That was new in 2017. And now compliance is being measured. Agencies have to report every 6 months on their Section 508 implementation to the Office of Management and Budget, which is an arm of the White House, and to GSA. This was required through a series of OMB memos, the latest from last year, 2023. And then last February, the Department of Justice and GSA issued their Section 508 report to the President and Congress based on the most recent data. And later I can talk about what some of that data actually showed.
I can't wait to hear about that. And I know one of my favorite things about the U.S. Access Board's work is kind of the influence on policy and rulemaking. And when you do have that influence, how does it then transition into the real world, the business world? So what does it do to really encourage the development of technologies, and what does that impact on the digital world? Like, what can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, let me give you a real life example. So this actually happened during one of our advisory committees, and it was on technology, ironically. So remember, the first iPhone in 2007 was not accessible at all to blind people. Now, today's iPhones are used by blind users because of its voiceover capabilities, and by people who use hearing aids because of its hearing aid compatibility. Neither of those existed when it first came out in 2007. And I think Section 508 played a part in that, because companies knew that in order to sell their products to the federal government, they needed to be accessible. And they weren't going to make one device for the federal government and another for other markets. So that's a real life example of how public policy can influence technology worldwide. We made deep ties with staff from the European Commission, and because of this, Europe followed our lead and required the development of a European accessibility standard for public procurement of technology, very much like Section 508. Their standard, which is called EN 301549, it's kind of a longer version of Section 508, is largely harmonized with the Section 508 standards, so both can be met without conflict, thus expanding the marketplace for accessibility solutions around the world. And largely because of our reputation, the Polish government formed a Polish Access Board. Canada developed regulations to implement provisional and national laws on accessibility, building on the work that we've done at the Access Board. And in Chile, a Council for Universal Accessibility for People with Disabilities was created and modeled on the Access Board's work. They're developing a national universal accessibility plan for their country that will take place over the next 10 years.
This makes me so proud
Yeah.
of the U.S. And I know we don't do everything overnight, but with time and the right people, the right players, the right influences, it's just we are moving in a good direction.
Yes.
There's always more to be done.
Yeah.
But thank you, David.
Yes, thank you, David. So happy to hear that our nation is leading by example and really influencing the nations around the globe. So very happy. Thank you for sharing those significant examples. And how do you incorporate your knowledge into your current endeavors on your multiple boards and some of the other areas that you're passionate about?
Well, so I don't think we mentioned it earlier, but so I retired 4 years ago. Sorry, 4 years ago. Seems like 2 years ago. I'm trying to keep busy during retirement, and I try to use my life experiences to continue my advocacy work. I'm on United Spinal Association's board of directors, along with Josh. I'm serving on Mobility Fitness's advisory committee. I worked with the International Association of Accessibility Professionals to create a new certification exam for accessibility professionals in the built environment. And I sit on Access Living's program committee. Access Living is one of the largest, probably the largest independent living center in the country in Chicago. We've had some success with Mobility Fitness. We secured an agreement with Planet Fitness to acquire accessible exercise equipment. And I hope that there will be similar agreements with other fitness properties in the future. And then 2 years ago, President Biden appointed me to the Amtrak Board of Directors, but Amtrak board members are required to have Senate confirmation. Mm-hmm. So that process still needs to be completed before I can begin my tenure, but I'm really looking forward to that because transportation accessibility is really where, I learned, my job 38 years ago. So I'm hoping that happens soon.
Well, I dream of retirement. Doesn't sound like you're retired. It sounds like you're busier than ever.
I'm just not paid.
But you do give me a lot of hope for the future, and I would love to know what your hopes for the future are around accessibility, and what are some simple things that businesses can do to help employees and consumers with disabilities to have better experiences down the road.
Okay, so let me circle back to what I was talking about earlier when I said I'd get back to some of the findings from that Section 508 report, and then I'll try to tie that in to your question. So as I mentioned before, last February, the Department of Justice and GSA issued their Section 508 report, and it found some progress, but it also found some troubling issues. The report found that PDFs are among the top 10 downloaded files from agencies, which is, I guess, not surprising, but only a third of them are accessible. 90% of internet pages tested were reported as conformant, but agencies tested 50 or fewer pages. And only 6% of agency intranet pages were tested, and about 12% of agencies are not testing intranet pages at all. So testing remains a barrier to accessible customer interactions and employee inclusion. Anecdotal information indicates that the majority of reported test results come from automated testing. And I think, most advocates know that automated testing of websites in particular is only part of the solution. Human testing is the rest of it. And current guidance doesn't stipulate testing methods nor sampling approaches, which makes it harder to draw conclusions about government-wide accessibility performance. So I hope that people with disabilities will continue to advocate for better access, and that businesses and agencies will follow the laws that apply to them and ask for help when they need technical assistance, when they need help. And there are free resources available, like the Access Board. They have an 800 number. They have technical assistance specialists that wrote the accessibility guidelines that can answer questions. There's 10 regional ADA centers around the country that can provide free technical assistance. And there's over 400 centers for independent living that they can turn to. So, I think those are some of my hopes and some really simple things that businesses can do.
Thanks, David.
You touched, David, upon the human element of accessibility and that user experience, humans testing sites and other digital assets. To that end, how would you recommend that both public and private entities engage with communities? People like me, people Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind serves, and other similar agencies serve here in the United States to really lean more upon that user experience.
So there's a famous saying, I think Jim Charlton from Chicago kind of coined it. I'm sure he wasn't the originator of it. Nothing about us without us. It's a slogan used to communicate the idea that no policy should be decided without the full and direct participation of members of the group affected by that policy. And this includes people with disabilities and other groups that are often marginalized from political, social, and economic opportunities. So don't develop policies that impact people with disabilities without consulting with them and their organizations first. When a new facility is being built or modified, or when a new product is being developed, do the same thing. Consult or ask for free technical assistance. It's available. There's lots of resources. Do the right thing.
I love that. And when I was in law school, I had the opportunity, but one of my professors was Robert Bergdorf, who did a tremendous amount around drafting the ADA. But he got me connected with Senator Harkin on the Help Committee with Andy Imperato.
Yeah.
And they made sure that every single bill that ever came through the Help Committee had a disability component, or at least was looked at very seriously with disability lens. And that always stuck with me. And so I love what you're saying, David, and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, you had a lot of good mentors. Those are all great people.
Thank you, David, for joining this episode of Where Are We Now and Spotlight Sessions Collaboration Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
And I reciprocate that, David. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all that you've done, all that you do. You're amazing. And for all of our guests, thank you so much for staying to the end. And please take a moment to check out CLB's Where Are We Now digital series by visiting the CLB YouTube page. You can learn more about accessiBe, the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, by subscribing on YouTube and following us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us on our handles at accessiBe_community and at Columbia Lighthouse. We're looking forward to the next episode. And as always, thank you for being on this journey with us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jocelyn.